So I'm trying to pause my vacuum because it just started going. And you know how when it sucks up the stuff, it's so loud and it's right next to my office. I'm like, all right, gotta get that turned off, but I think we're in a good shape. How's everybody? Ready for the holidays? Ready to
Ready to
be
go.
ready? I'm gonna use that mantra, Lily. I'm ready to be ready. So close. Um, okay. Well, I can pull up the slides. I'm going to be using the same slides from the last session, but I figured maybe while I do that, I was curious if there was any like lingering questions or thoughts from last time, or maybe even anything specific that anyone would like me to focus on in the recap. And I can try to, put some extra time there if that's helpful. So, any questions, thoughts before I dive into the recap?
Just one thing that I was hoping folks could think about in their small groups is around this co-creation idea with students and engaging students in our co-creation of some of those ideas or tests of change. So just interested in that if that comes up again.
Okay. All right. Then I will get into it. So I have trimmed the deck, and I think we have about 20-ish, 25 minutes to kind of work through the content. I think the bigger meat is just going to be working through all of it together after. But just to go back through what we talked about, some of the highlights, we recapped some of the concepts and approaches of what I call service design, but what you all have been learning about, and a lot of it is about mapping journeys, mapping processes, mapping ecosystems, and doing so with both your partners and your customers slash students. So we talked a little bit in the last session about the difference between above the line and below the line, and how we use that concept in service design to map service experiences and how that helps us understand the internal organizational processes that deliver the experience for our students. And so I was trying to make sure that we tie it back a little bit to, I think it was module 4, where you all learned about journey maps and process maps, but really a service blueprint is taking a journey map, which is the student experience through a journey, and the touch points, and that can be in person, that can be digital, that can be a form that they may have with your service. So, right, I use student admissions as an example because it's a project we just wrapped up. But a student might have a touch point with, anything from a high school guidance counselor to, maybe a recruiter to maybe a coach to maybe someone who works in financial aid, to their support system around them. We work with Gear Up, so some of the Gear Up counselors are touch points they have, but also apps, college websites, application forms. Those are all touch points with the service. So all that lives above the line, and I just tried to super simply visualize that here. But you also have all the below the line items, which are the activities that are not visible to the students, but that are necessary for them to experience that journey. So what you guys talked about in module 4 is, the process map. What are the internal, I always say the processes, the technology, and the people that together create that experience for the student. So above the line and below the line is terminology that we use in service design. I actually, before the call last time, and I'm curious if either of those resonated more with you all, but before the call, I had talked with Lily and Stephanie, and we kind of talked about, how helpful is it to throw another kind of metaphor or concept at a group when you all are taking in new approaches and new processes, and there's so much jargon, and a lot of the times we're talking about the same things, we're just using different words. So I included this because I found that both the above the line and below the line, when we talk about mapping, but also this front stage and backstage idea can be really helpful in just helping us think about what we're doing and why we're doing and who we're doing it not for, but with. And so I included it. And so the other part, just to recap, that you can use to think about the experience, the journey map, and the process map is the front stage and backstage metaphor. This one comes from the Norman Nielsen Group, which is a very big resource in kind of UX design, UX research, so software development, because a lot of those tools get applied there. So they have additional resources if you're ever curious. But this front stage idea is the same as the below and the above and below the line, which, right, front stage is the part of the play that the audience sees. It's the part of the service that the student would interact with directly, the touch points. And then you also have the backstage parts of a play that the students don't see, but without it, a play couldn't exist. So in this example here, right, you have lighting, you have sound, you have directors, you have costumes, right? All the elements that are necessary for the audience to be able to enjoy the play. So that's kind of the different visual or mental models that I like to reference when I'm working in this world. But I'm curious, did either of those stick more with you all when we went through it last week, or did any of them resonate more than another, and why? Okay. Well, I'm curious if, as oh,
I was just going to say, I think they're both equally helpful. They just really give you that idea of what's the part that can be seen and visible and what's the part that's underlying, but it's still equally, if not more important sometimes.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because it's one of those where, you again, you have your jargon and your terminology that you've kind of lived with for years and years, and I'm always interested in what resonates. So as you all go through this work, I'm curious if anything sticks more than others. But okay, so we got above the line, below the line, we have front stage and backstage. And the other piece that we talked about, which I would argue is probably the most important part of that session, is the how. And we talked about co-creation as kind of a core tenant in service design. And this quote just really sticks with me. It's from Tim Brown, and he says that when we're designing services or designing anything, it's not us versus them or even us on behalf of them. It has to be us with them. And so that really helps us remember and think about the fact that co-creation to me is the core tenet of all of service design. And it's really just intentional collaboration. It's collaborating with your students. So whether that's, users of your service or customers that pay for your service, can be either, but also the partners, the stakeholders, the internal collaborators that make that experience happen. All those partners should be involved in the process. Um, it's intentional, it's continuous collaboration, so ongoing throughout the entire journey. And one of the biggest pieces of co-creation is the ability to leverage diverse perspectives and experiences. We can't design our services that are serving students for ourselves because we have different needs, we have different goals, we have different experiences. And so including their unique and authentic voices in that process is, to me, probably the most important part in our work. Okay, co-creating with student. This is a valuable reminder I think I pulled out last time, which is sometimes when we say co-creating with students, we see organizations or teams basically ask their customers to design the service for them. They say, how should we make this look? What should this feel like? What should this look like? And I think there's a difference between asking someone to design the experience for you versus including them in the process. And that's, I think, very intentionally engaging them. And that can be, again, that can be journey mapping sessions with your partners, with your customers. But often that includes primary qualitative research, interviews, observational research, feedback sessions. You can do early concept testing, prototyping with them, involving them, again, continuously and intentionally in the process so that you're gathering continuously, maybe starting with, well, what's the admissions journey look like for you? That's a starting point. And then you might say, well, it looks like there is a pain point here where, you were trying to find information, you couldn't find it. Tell me about that. And then you might identify a challenge where the information they wanted wasn't available where they thought it would be. So that could be a simple opportunity of, creating better opportunity or creating more accessible information at that touch point. So you're going through the process involving them, digging deeper as you go along, often from seeing the full picture first, so understanding their entire journey, and then drilling into specific parts of the journey, specific phases, or specific touch points. And equally, we talked about how important it is to involve internal actors and partners because they are creating the experience. They are the ones working below the surface, below the line to deliver that experience. That maybe this bears repeating too, but I think having worked both in public and private sector and multi-matrix organizations with lots of different teams and often very siloed efforts, even when the goal is a connected journey. Just I think going into co-creation with partners with the understanding, not the judgment, that we all go into these sessions with different goals. We have different incentives. We have different motivations. And so I think accepting that and considering that in your co-creation is important and valuable and will lead to better collaboration, less duplication of work, better cross-functional collaboration, less silos, and in the end, a better experience for the students because they don't care about all that below the surface stuff. They just want to go through the thing they're going through and reach their goal. There's a name for that, which some of you might know. It's Conway's Law, which is basically the idea that a lot of times organizations ship their org chart. So the idea that sometimes our services and products are experienced by our customers the way that our organization is structured. And so part of co-creation is to avoid that, is to always center the experience and collaborating internally in a way that that doesn't happen, that the experience is structured and delivered around the goal of the customer or the user. I kept this in there because I think it's another one of those that always just sticks. It's just a really great way to think about it. This is from Jim Kalbach, who's like a big voice in service design. And he talks about the importance of the mapping, not the map. So it's about the mapping, the verb, not about the map, the noun. Meaning we can create the most beautiful, polished, detailed, precise journey map or blueprint you've ever seen. But if your internal partners are not bought in, if they don't feel like they were brought along, if they don't feel like they're included, if they don't feel like their voices are heard or their stakeholders or customers' voices aren't heard, nothing's going to happen with it. And so, right, he says that journey maps without collaboration might as well be wallpaper. You can hang them up on the wall and they'll live there and, make the office look nice and look like something's happening. But unless you're involving everyone that matters throughout the journey, you might as well just throw it. And I've seen that, right? Like you see those journey maps just die in somebody's desk drawer, collecting dust because they weren't created with. I think this one resonated with a lot of people, and it's probably one of my favorite lessons of working in service design is the power of low fidelity, right? And it goes along with it's about the mapping, not the map. The idea that when we are too protective or, for whatever reason, not willing to let our partners join us in the often messy early stages. Discovery is messy. It means we have to admit that we don't know yet. It means that we don't have the answers, that we are trying to get them. And so I think we hesitate to let others into the very early part of a project. And right, you can have too many cooks in the kitchen and you can have groupthink and all those things, but I do think that when we're trying to co-create, we can't show up to a room and say, "Hey, Lily, I created a beautiful map. It's all finished. Here you go. What do you think?" And you'll be like, "Oh, looks great." You want to have people feel and actually be able to participate in the shaping, in the process of becoming, in the process of mapping the verb. Because if it's too polished, we'll just say, well, this is already finished. I can't contribute anything here. I can give you a thumbs up or thumbs down, but that's about it. So low fidelity, especially in the early stages, is incredibly powerful. I have some examples here of actually this one. You can see kind of the top. I don't know if you can read that. That says end customer, and then below the line were all the internal partners. And we actually went through all the insights from the customer journey first and mapped those out, and then worked with the partners to map out the below the line pieces. We had a few pieces here that we already had identified in an earlier session, but this is the example I shared where, right, like our partner at the end actually stood up in front of a kind of a contentious internal relationship partner and presented this map as his own and as, a way to address some of the challenges they were facing. So I will die on this hill, low fidelity for the win. Okay. How are we on time? Good. From journey maps to service blueprints, this is really just a repeat of what I showed earlier, the idea that you have the student journey map at the top, and then you have the below the line process map, which are your institutional operations. And together, those pieces create a service blueprint. And you always have the line of visibility, which is where the user or the customer interacts with your service, with your brand, with your product, with anything within your ecosystem. So it can be pretty broad, the touch points. Journey maps, generally, again, this depends on the topic, it depends on the goal, it depends on the audience. But generally, I would say journey maps include things like the phases. What are the stages of the experience? Important is using the language and mental model of the student or customer here. So framing it from their perspective based on primary research rather than your internal view. The users, who's involved, what are their needs and goals? I think one of the most valuable learnings from the qualitative research often is the emotional experience. So, what's the perception of the experience? Oh, Lily, do you have a question? I'll pause quick.
Oh, I was just curious if this is like organized so that blueprint where you're putting the two maps together, is that organized around like a chronological experience or some kind of active milestone that somebody has to hit, and then you map the student journey to the next milestone and then the processes to the next milestone? I'm just curious how you line them up.
You mean, if I'm understanding correctly, you're asking, do you have to have the entire journey front to back, or can you do it in pieces? Is that the
Well,
question?
if you go back 2 slides,
Yep.
you've got these different icons here, and they're kind of on top of each other, but they're a little off center. So
Uh-huh.
maybe I'm just curious if this is a chronological timeline from like a start
Yeah.
to finish of a process, or if there are other ways that you would line them up. So this is what happens in March. And so
Yeah.
I know here's the process steps in March, here's the student steps in March, or if it's
I
more
think
milestone because the windows are longer and not
I
really
gotcha.
clear cut,
Yeah.
you know.
Again, I'd say it depends on the goal of the study, the scope, right? Ideally, you would have framed your study at the start and have a specified scope. So just in this example, I'm using a very, very simplified view of the college admissions journey that we just delivered journey maps for. So again, this is like super, super, super simplified. Um, just to communicate the idea, but we had started or scoped that journey to begin at a certain point, which is senior year of high school. So for a lot of students, that was kind of the start of their admissions journey. Some of them had already started before, all the way through college, beginning of college is kind of what I'm showing here. These below are again super simplified, right? Like they would receive an application or yeah, an application from a student as they're starting to apply to colleges. They might have someone at a help desk helping them as they navigate application and financial aid. They will work through their internal platforms to make sure students receive the communications they need and hit their deadlines. They might have someone who needs to, like maybe that's the college counselor or someone during the tour. Those tours came up a lot. That is, guiding the student and their parent, or that's answering questions they might have. They're probably navigating the internal kind of back end portals that students then access as they enter, their information for rooming and parking ticket or parking, what's it called? Parking permits and all that stuff.
Okay, so they're pretty lined up.
They're meant to be more or less lined up. But again, if you look at this and it's kind of blurry, but you have this is a fairly complex one, but you have the phase up here. In this case, we have actually the end customer and the business customer because this was a B2B to C client. But so you have the phase from the end customer who's trying to buy a home in this case. You have the phase identified and named by the business customer who's helping deliver that experience. You have the emotional experience right here. We had some additional context and like they had some guiding principles and experience attributes I think that they had identified. So you can include different pieces that move along a certain timeline. This one is not defined by this could be a 2 year journey or a 2 months journey. It doesn't really matter. Most of the journey still holds up, right? And every individual person will have different pieces of the experience, but you're trying to create that aggregate view so that you can address the aggregate journey. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, again, like these characteristics I would say are pretty high level, but in most journey maps, I would say you want to include these pieces. You would have the touch points. Again, that can be touch points with a platform, touch point with a person, touch point with a product, touch point with a service. However you scope the project, that's how you will design your map, right, to reflect those criteria. And then below the line, often you will include the people, the processes, and the technology. And in this case, we talked about that, and I can go back to that in a minute. This is also a current state experience where we then integrated some future state opportunities in the map, meaning all these lines that you see, I don't know, can you see my mouse on the screen? I don't know if you can. Yeah, okay. So all these pieces, the process, the technology, and the people are current teams, current internal processes, and current technology that exists within their organization that deliver this experience. In the green, we then added in identified opportunities and initial focuses for these teams to improve the experience because there was a big pain point up at this stage for the end customer. Any, does that make sense? It's one of those where, in my head, it's very clear, but I don't know if it's really, if I'm communicating it the best. So does that kind of resonate or make sense with as you're thinking about your work and your projects and how one might use a blueprint? Okay. Feel free to stop me. This is, yeah, to clarify. Okay, so based on what we just talked about, right, you can have a current state blueprint and you can have a future state service blueprint. They can be together. I've even seen blueprints where one client, it was about kind of a fun project. It was about people who, their flight experience for an airline. But all the touch points, pre and post flight, was just as important, right? So airport and all that stuff. And they created a journey map that was the current state flight experience, but then they had a like a see-through overlay of the future state on top. So the client could kind of see, oh, this is actually how it would directly impact the customer experience at this point if we were to change this part of our experience, or maybe if we started a new partnership with this, lounge, then maybe that would improve the experience here. So it just there's different ways you can communicate current and future state. Again, it depends on who's using it. Have they been involved throughout the process, right? Have they been part of the mapping? But the journey map should always be designed around the user of the tool or the user of the insights. Um, the current state, right, is just a picture of how the service is delivered and experienced today. And then the future state is a picture of how we might improve it based on what we learned about the student experience. And that can be fixing a small part of the journey, to your point, Lily. Like you might say, I think in this example here, we might say finding information about financial aid was a pain point for the student group that we researched. So what we can do in the future state map, we might then change something about the internal process. We might change something about the way the communication is, delivered to the student. We might change the way that the student accesses the information, right? Like whatever the learning was about the pain point from the student is what informs the change in our below the line institutional operations. And that's how I look at a future state. It can be, it could be that this entire part is changed in a future state, right? Like we need to change how we collaborate. We need to change this tool. We need to change the team structure. We need to change the organization of this part of the organization. We need to change these forms. It can be anything from a tiny thing in how the content is written to, right, like redesigning the entire delivery system. And that's really it in a nutshell. I figured I would pause just to see if there's any specific questions or areas you want me to go back to, and then I know, Lily, we're going to dive into it with the actual work you all have been doing. So any questions or any slides you'd like me to go back to? Okay. If there's no immediate questions, Lily, if I can stop screen sharing for now, and we can always pull stuff back up if needed.
Okay,
All right.
great. All right, let's see. I will go back. So we're right here. And guiding questions, I thought we could kind of consider today, and we'll kind of break into some groups here, would be, oh, where did it go? Sorry. So considering your aim statement, who are the stakeholders that you envision being a part of your co-creation process for this future state? Um, I'm interested in kind of hearing what you all think about how you might engage students in this co-creation. And so, kind of like Lena shared, not like we're asking them to design the whole thing for us, but just making sure that they're a part of our process and that we're kind of testing some of these ideas with them as we move forward. And then I'm curious if anybody has any questions about like more technical questions on the facilitation of any of these tools or um, just any concerns or questions that you may have that it's is coming up. And I will also just kind of, I've had some incredible meetings with, I don't know, maybe 8 or so folks to date so far around your aim statements and driver diagrams and thinking about like just overall projects. I hope that y'all have been able to connect with either myself or Stephanie or Beth Collins, who's going to be leading us through our session on January 7th. If you haven't had a chance to schedule that yet, please do. We would love to make sure we have a chance to connect with everyone before we come together on the 7th. So that will make sure that we're all very prepared and ready to dive in. So, okay, right now, let's see. I guess I'm just going to do breakout groups. Let's see, where is that little feature? More.
I think you have to have participants open, if I remember correctly.
Am I not a co-host or something?
Yeah, I don't see
Oh,
that
I see
feature.
the option on my end here, Lily. Maybe I can try to.
just go ahead, Stephanie,
Ah,
if you want to launch the breakout rooms, and then I'll make sure I put these questions into the chat.
okay, great. Let's do maybe 5 groups of 4 to 5. That's how
Yeah,
the math
that's a good
works out
number.
today.
How long do we have? Sorry, Lily.
Oh, yeah. We have quite a good bit. We have until about 3,
Okay,
so
great.
25 minutes or so.
All right, there you go. Brandon, did you get a prompt for the breakout groups? Ah, there we go. Lily, I do wonder if we should maintain kind of like an updated aim statement document because what I notice is when we get into breakout groups, folks take around 5 to 10 minutes just updating each other on their projects again. So either
Mm,
we have that go-to link so they can all take a peek and go, okay, get situated, or we could have recurring breakout groups where they're in the same groups and that way they build the rapport over time and they're like, oh yeah, last month we
hmm.
talked about your driver diagram. How's that going? Right? And they can get like,
Yeah,
say,
I've been updating in my that document where we broke out the caseloads for the December check-ins.
yes,
I've been
yes,
putting all my notes in there for the students as I'm meeting with them. So I haven't been putting their updated statements back into the Google Doc, but they've all been updated. Well, I haven't met with
yes.
everybody yet, but
I have to add mine. Yeah. Now that transfer pathways are done, I'm like, I can get everything else done now. So, but yeah, they're going well. I'm glad that we have the breakout group time for them to connect as well. So
Mhm.
hopefully, let's see, when I go into a breakout room and we can bounce around, I think the chat should still show, but in case not, I can bounce around and then paste it back in.
Okay.
Okay. See you in a bit.
Mhm.
Lily.
Hi.
I'm just able to join after those wrestling resume reviews I told you about.
Oh my gosh, yes, they're in breakout rooms.
Okay.
I am not a host. Isn't that crazy? Hmm. Hmm. Let me try to sign in again. Now I'm a host. Perfect. So now I should be able to maneuver these breakout rooms. Okay, I'm going to put you in room 5.
Thank you.
Bye. How'd the breakout room go? Was everyone ready to wrap up, or were conversations still going strong?
Now, we had kind of ran out of things to talk about for a bit.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. See. I think we're all back, right? How did that go? How were breakout rooms? Folks have plenty to talk about. Good.
I think we made it through one question. There's just, always so many different pieces and context yeah, but I think it's good to think through it together.
Made through one question. Okay, I see.